Hello and welcome to Saturday Service, a podcast all about faith and football with me, Graham Boozy, in association with the Live Streams Churches here in Southend-on-Sea in England. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Warren Evans. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Graham.
Just to begin with, would you mind just giving a sort of general introduction to yourself to let the dear listeners know a little bit about you?
Yes, certainly. It's always a little bit awkward, that one, tell us a little bit about yourself. So I am Warren Evans, as you've just said, Graham. I am the Chief Exec of Sports Chaplaincy UK and Ireland and Chair of Global Sports Chaplaincy Association. I've been involved with that charity since 2009, both directly as a chaplain, but then as its Chief Exec since 2015. So I just have the privilege of working with people up and down this nation involved in sport and involved in church. So that's a sort of brief nutshell. And it is very brief. That's the Twitter version, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's okay, because we're going to dig a little bit deeper anyway as we go on. That is a horrible question. The amount of times I've been asked that and just gone, oh, I'm 40, I'm from Southend. It just doesn't work for me.
I can give you my family background, my kids, my wife, and all that great stuff.
Some people do, but, it's your prerogative. This is the part usually where I find out about my guests' formative experiences with football. But obviously I noticed you're probably a bit of a big Rugby League fan as well.
Well, I played a little bit of football. I was in goals because of my size, ultimately, when I did play football at a reasonable level.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll dig into that as well then. But yeah, feel free to sprinkle Rugby League or boxing or anything you like into these questions as you see fit. Is there a particular moment that you can remember where your interest in sports was sort of sparked?
Well, I'm one of four brothers, so back in when we were kids in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you had no option. You either played sport or you didn't play sport. And we loved sport. I've got a twin brother, an older brother and a younger brother, and we just loved sport. And back then, whatever's on the TV, you played. If it was darts, you played darts. If it was tennis, tennis, rugby, cricket. If it was Saturday morning, world of sport, you were wrestling in the front room. If it was boxing, it was boxing. So we played everything. And certainly back when I was young, we had the privilege of being at schools that you played badminton, table tennis, squash, rugby, cricket. You played every football, obviously. We had the privilege of playing every sport. We played it all the time. And I guess it was the saving grace to my mum, because just to burn some energy off out of four lads. So I can't remember an age, just always being active, always loved sport, always loved participating in sport, always loved the competition of sport. So for me, it was just part of my natural upbringing in that sense of being brothers in that kind of competitive environment, but in a healthy environment as well.
And you mentioned it just a second ago, but did you play football to a reasonable level, or did young Warren have ambitions to be the next?
I think when I was a young, you dreamt, didn't you? You were either a spy or a football player or something, some superstar. And so I was privileged to play a reasonable level at football. I always speak to a friend of mine who's a gentleman called Mark Greenwood, who's an evangelist. And Mark is 5.5 foot and I'm 6'4". And when we first played each other, he was playing for one team. He was in the other nets and I was in the other nets at 15. And so, I was quite a large guy. I played a reasonable level at football. But the joys of when sport played at that time when I was younger, my father was a pastor. I couldn't really take it on to any great heights. I'm not sure if I could have gone to any great heights, but I want to bad. I could save the odd goal.
Is there any sort of particular sporting events that stick out in your memory as being particularly seminal to you?
I think for me, there's so many, and I think so many of them hit you at certain points in your life. I remember at certain points in our life, the Olympics were really important at some point, and it wasn't like you had thousands of channels back then. You used to have 3, 4 or 5 channels, I think, growing up. So you didn't have a range of things to do. You either played sport or watched it, or what was ever on TV. So I think there are certain times in the year. I remember visiting a lady that was like a grandma to me, and we would always watch whatever was on TV. So for her, it was snooker, it was darts. For me, you always had your favourite players at certain sports. For me, it was Ray Reardon at snooker, John Lowe at darts. My brother liked Eric Bristow. But for football, I was always a Reds fan. I'm going to put the exclamation mark here. I was born in Manchester. I always have been a Manchester United fan. That's probably turned off half your listeners. But Stuart Coppell, Brian Robson, and even going on to Schmeichel later on. But they're seminal moments of, I guess I love boxing. So Muhammad Ali, and some of the Duran fights. And I guess when slightly older, when you're looking at certain fights, when middleweights was really strong in the UK, and you had Eubanks and you had Nigel Benn, and then you had other people. So yeah, a real mixture of sports. And I think depending where you're at in your life, where you're at in that time, they all play a part in, even the Rocky movies, how you can get up from defeat, how you can pursue past challenges, how you get over injuries. So I think a lot of sport teaches you discipline, but it also teaches you to come up against adversities and get over them.
And would you mind, though, sharing a little bit about rugby league? Because obviously Lancashire and Yorkshire are the heartlands of the sport. So I was just intrigued as to how interwoven they are into the sort of fabric of the community in those areas.
Yeah, I think like everything's changing these days, but certainly rugby league is the M62 corridor from Hull right away across. And I was always it was Bradford Northern when I was younger, but Bradford Bulls supporter. I again played rugby, was able to play at a semi-serious level, but again fell on Sundays. I always felt more freedom in rugby because as a Christian, I was always told to turn the other cheek, don't be aggressive. But having the privilege to, and rightly so, tackle someone fair but firmly and get some of that aggression outside of you was always a joy and a pleasure. So I think for me, just like a lot of the communities, rugby league has a massive impact on its local communities. But just like all sport impacts its economies. When a sport club's doing well, increases the atmosphere in the sense that it has an economic impact, but it also has an emotional impact. And I would say even to some extent, a spiritual impact on a community because it changes the atmosphere. When things are going well, everything's possible. You look at Man United and they always had Fergie time. They could be 3-0 down with 2 minutes to go, and they were, weren't they, in European Cup? Not very long to go, 2-0 down. Everything's possible. And I think for me in rugby league, it's the benefit of what I didn't like when I was young. Football fans were separated. In rugby league, you're all mixed in. There was something wholesome that the aggression took out on the pitch. You shook hands afterwards. Didn't matter if someone had caught you, clipped you in a game. It was always gentlemen will be gentlemen after the game. And for me, that was always, again, about teaching lessons. If you go back to the history of not rugby league, but rugby union, the original game, you talk about Thomas Arnold and where it came from, the school of rugby, and it teaching you to manage hard knocks in life and take that off the playing field. So lots of great values, I would say. But yeah, I always had a soft spot for rugby league. And that's how my role started, actually, in rugby league.
And I don't know whether I'm looking at it from a distance with the sort of rose-tinted spectacles, but is the Odsal Stadium as evocative as it looks in certain images?
It's definitely been improved over the recent years. It was a bit, let's say, it needed a bit of TLC. But yeah, Oddsal's an interesting stadium just because of the size of it, because it's in a bowl, because it holds, I think it was 104,000 in 1956 or something. It's certainly the gateway of the city. It certainly carries something. If you were going to and this is me being biased, but if you're going to put a pin in the map and say, where would you want a sporting team to be from an accessibility perspective, but also just to enjoy, it would be there. Odsal Stadium certainly does carry, and through my rose-tinted spectacles, it carries something. It carries a legacy. It carries an atmosphere. Yes, there are a lot of modern stadiums that are fantastic, but it's something unique about Odsal.
If we could talk a little bit about your own faith journey, you mentioned your father was a minister, so I'm interested to know how it began for you, but also there's a really good quote from you about your journey of faith being a bit like an extendable dog lead with God holding one end and you being allowed to stretch your feet a little bit if you like, but slowly being drawn back in. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about it.
Yes, I was blessed to have not just good parents, but parents who loved God, loved Jesus. And they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the talk. And so for me, it was never a doubt that God wasn't real. Yes, it was their faith, but I didn't live on their faith in that sense. But I remember I look back now and I think, no, but I remember a very distinctive time giving my life to the Lord at the age of 5. Easter 75, giving my life to the Lord, sat on my dad's knee, and my dad asking me, did I want Jesus as my Lord and Saviour? And now, obviously, through life, you journey, as that quote, the dog lead in that sense. But I think I've never run away from God. I might have not, I would say, pursued him to the extent I should have pursued him when I was younger. And that's just life in sometimes dejection, rejection, frustration, emotions, puberty, and all that navigating through life and its challenges and its ups and downs. But for me, just as you said, I felt probably in my Teens, I felt that God had placed a calling on my life, but felt I wasn't very eloquent. My brothers were all very great orators. I wasn't a great orator, which is strange because I do a lot of broadcast now, but I wasn't. I would get tongue twisted. I would get frustrated because I had the words in my head and I couldn't get them out. And so I would feel very frustrated. But God takes you on a journey where you can learn skills. And this is why I really look back and thank God for the journey that I've been on, because it equips you and enables you and takes you to a point where you do appreciate it wasn't all natural. I'm not a natural orator. I'm not natural at this. I'm not natural at that. But with a bit of hard work and God's grace and mercy, you can learn certain skills that allow you then to walk into your calling. So for me, probably felt God's hand in my life at 16, felt a lot of rejection at that time. People saying, oh, you're only doing what your dad wants to do. And so I thought of threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I never really pursued God. I would still call myself a Christian, but I wasn't pursuing him to the same extent. And I might have been a youth leader and I might have done all these things. But I do remember probably in my early 20s where I just felt God speak to me really strongly. And I wasn't doing anything major. We were brought up, we lived in Manchester, or Middleton, Manchester, and then moved when we were quite young at 7 or 8 to a place called Holmewood, which was at the time one of the largest council estates in Northern Europe. And my dad took on a church there. And so that estate had its own challenges, deprivation, literary numeracy. And we sort of walked into some of that and you sort of lived some of that. But I remember being 23 and God really speaking to me and a sense of, are you going to follow me? And I'm not going to say I wasn't doing anything super, super wrong. I was probably doing what every other teenager, early 20s, going out, having a few beers, enjoying life, but not taking a lot of things seriously. And I just felt, as you said, this extendable bog lead where I felt God had allowed me to go up to a point and then there was a tug. And I'm not saying what would have happened after that tug, but I just felt God saying, enough's enough. Come in, son. It's time to follow me and pursue me. So that's what I did. And I'm not going to say it's all been roses ever since, but it's certainly there's been a sense of peace. There have been challenges in all my roles in that sense. A sense when you're a leader, you're going to take some challenges, you take some flak, you get hit and you sometimes stumble over. But for me, it's about getting back up and fighting the fight. And so for me, yeah, we've had challenges, but I was blessed. Had some great parents, some great illustration of what good parenting and good Christians are. And that kind of conviction doesn't leave you. So yeah, I was privileged to have a great upbringing. Again, that brings its own challenges because you feel unworthy. I'll never be as good as them, and all those other things that you've got to battle your own little demons in that sense. But yeah, on retrospect, on reflection, I was incredibly blessed with parents, great family, loving environment, pursuing God.
And do you feel that environment has informed the manner in which you work with sports chaplaincy? From what I can glean, you have a clear desire to uplift others. And I was wondering, did Holmwood create that in you, if you like?
I think one of the things that is part of your DNA sometimes, and it's not your parents, just a legacy. They went to make a difference. And I think the one thing I've always wanted to do, and I've probably put on other things, I'm not that bothered what I do. I just want to make a difference. And I might not be the best player at anything, but I'm not a bad coach, or someone can use my shoulders to climb a little bit higher. And so that's always been my attitude. I'm always willing to kick someone's door down for them and let them go through or give them a lift up in that sense. So for me, it's very much part of my nature that I want to see people be the best. I don't like that statement, the best version of me, because sometimes the best version of us is still poor. But I want people to not limit themselves, see them as God sees them, and see the stars of the limit in that sense. God can use anybody in that sense if you're willing. And so I always have a statement: if you're not bothered who gets the glory, you'll get the job done. So that's one of my attitudes in that sense. And so I'm privileged to meet lots of people, but I'm always privileged to be able to speak into people's lives, speak hope, speak faith, speak all the great things to bring people out of sometimes what are tricky situations with mental health, depression. All that doesn't make sense, but it's not always the truth. And it's trying to redefine what truth is and reality is and encouraging people to make better choices.
And we obviously touched on it a little bit, but I was just wondering if you'd be able to share a short testimony about how God's worked in your life, maybe during a particular circumstance.
Yeah, I'll share one because I've shared it before. But again, you'd think as a pastor or a minister, you won't have certain challenges, but you do. I certainly did when I was ministering and pastoring a church. I took on a church in a similar area to my father. Didn't really want to. In that sense, it ticked all the wrong boxes. And I'm not blaming the people I engaged with. Some of this was my fault, but you'll learn on reflection. But some of this was probably putting in too many hours, probably not looking after me. But I hear that now, and it sounds really selfish. And there is a healthy looking after me, and there's a selfish looking after me. And I think we're tipping into the selfish looking after me. There has got to be a cost and sacrifice as a Christian in my book. But for me, probably did too much, especially if, and I don't know where you sit on this, if you've got a prophetic edge, if you see things that other people don't see. When people don't see them, they don't miss them. But when you've seen it, you've tasted it, you're more or less touching, it doesn't happen, you grieve over it. And I think when I was in a church and I felt it could have gone somewhere in the sense of we could have made a real difference in that estate, but actually it's where God placed me to get involved in sports chaplaincy. I just felt I could take the horse to water, but the horse wasn't drinking. And I took that very personal. It got me really down. And then on reflection, it wasn't my fault in that sense. I remember God saying to me, and me shouting at God, God's big enough that he can cope with you shouting at him, saying, God, I don't like church. And God said, that's fine, I love church. And I knew I was going to lose this argument, but I was going to just rant and have a vent. And eventually I said, all right, God, I love your church, but I don't like it. And God said, not everyone who comes to church is my church. And so often when you see things, it's like one of the best quotes I see is they talk about Walt Disney. And one of his friends talks about Walt Disney saying, because he died before the first theme park was built, a shame that Walt didn't see the theme park finished. And the guy turned around and went to another guy and said, he did see it, because if he never saw it, it would never have happened. And I think so often when you've got a prophetic edge, you see things and it doesn't always happen. You look at the Bible, all the prophets were manic depressants. And so when you learn that sometimes it's not your responsibility, when people say you're not a leader if people aren't following, that's not always the truth. You look in the Bible, there were loads of prophets who were leaders. No one was following. There were people who were being rebellious. So we come out with cliches at times, especially in Christendom, in this world we follow. And you can't deny certain things, but you've got to have the courage to face certain things and say, I've done what I felt was right. I'll live by those consequences. And I think part of that in life is you've got to be willing to live and face those consequences with your giving of time, with your giving of resource. I think for me, I hear this a lot. And certainly in this 21st century, you can be the best version of you. You can be the best dad, the best business person, the best Christian, the best church leader. No, you can't. You can be good at all those things, but you can't be the best, because if you're the best at one of them, everything else is going to suffer. And it doesn't mean that's wrong, but you can't pretend that I'm the best church leader and the best father. It doesn't happen, because each take a degree of sacrifice. I'm not saying you shouldn't put a lot of hours in to church or in a business, because to be successful, you're going to have to invest time. You've got to invest it. And generally, those who suffer are your family. But ultimately, if you do it well, your family will look at you and say, that's what a man does, and that's what a father does, and that's what we want to do. But it's never just one answer. And so I think so often these cliches in life that we think, oh, everything's great. It's not. We navigate. It's never a straight curve. It's always like a sea. It's always up and down. And it's always having the courage to reflect and say, do I need to change something at this moment in time?
I always ask people what their favourite Bible quote or verse is. And 15 episodes in, I'm still trying to decide, is this a good question? Because when it was thrown back at me, I panicked and I was like, I don't know. But I didn't know if you had one that you particularly like to live your life by.
I think for me, there are always great scriptures, and some of them are more influential depending on what you're going through. A bit like a Good News Bible, Gideon's the good news for everyone, and they give you the New Testament. It's got suggested verses. I think for me, there are certain key ones like Romans 8:28. I love Psalms 100 because the password into God's presence in the message is thank you. There are also certain scriptures I think are really influential that are not positive, in the sense one of the most influential verses that impacts me, which is I think one of the saddest scriptures in the Old Testament, is in Samuel when it talks about Samson, when it talks about the Spirit of God left him yet he knew not. And so that challenges me to be sensitive to God's calling, to sensitive to God's Spirit. And we can all lose the plot. We can all lose it. We heard the statement, pride comes before a fall. We've all got to act in a sense of humility. We've all got to be accountable to each other. We can't be in that sense. But I'm more than a conquering Christ Jesus. I think some of these are, I'm a co-heir with Christ, I'm a child of God. All these are really healthy, but I don't know if I have one particular verse. One of my big things, I love the whole of God's word. I love it. I don't get it. I don't always understand it. I don't always like some of it, but I love the whole of it as an entity in that sense.
And I'm interested to sort of combine the two things we've talked about so far and see how you got to your current point. You have a lot of experience in managerial roles in your career. And I wondered, was there a point or a trigger where you sort of decided you wanted to apply these skills in conjunction with your faith? Because there's a certain part of your life, and I hope I'm not being too nosy, around sort of 2008, 2009 sort of time where you became involved with like Bradford Community Association and the Bethel Community Church. Your wife's off to Bible college. It just feels like to me there's a bit of a sea change at some point in your life. And I was wondering, am I making too big a deal of this part, or was there a decision?
I think there's always a journey in life. I won't go into it now, but when me and my wife Juliet met, we met in 97 and we got married within the year and we felt God's hand. And I think one of the scriptures I shared, which was from Joshua, is for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. I probably didn't realize what that really meant in that sense. But yeah, from that decision, I think we were, as a church and as a family, we're always connected with a congregation down south called Kingdom Faith. Colin Urquhart, Pastor Colin Urquhart, who's now passed away, but I know his son really well, Clive Urquhart. Clive's older than me, but Clive and Jane are great friends. And we just felt it was great to invest into my wife because I'd been saved all my life, for a better phrase. My wife hadn't. She'd been in a nominal Christian family, for a better phrase. Dad might have been on the PCC or church warden, but did they have a real living faith? And she wanted to do that. So we took that time out in 2008, built some great friendships down south, and then felt God was sending us to the States. And then we came back to Yorkshire, really to sell the house. And I thought I was going to the States, but ended up having a friend who was an American friend of ours who was pastoring, who said, I've got in a bit of a pickle. Can you come and help us out? Which we did. And then all of a sudden, at that point, that's when we got involved and never thought about it, pastoring a church. And so we pastored a church in Biley, Bethel Community Church, or it was called Bethel Wesley Reformed when we took it on. And then they were trying to get involved in the community. So I basically helps the failing community centre really turn it around, give it purpose and life, and connect with other bodies in the estate and really challenge people. And so, yeah, I guess from that perspective, that was the and that's when I got involved in sports chaplaincy, not because I had any intentions. I was so focused on impacting my local community, for a better phrase. But it was a friend of mine who was chaplain at the Bradford Bulls, who then rang me one day and said, God's told me. I went, what's God told you? He said, you're the next chaplain. I said, well, he better tell me. So we went on this journey, and some of that was because he was moving away, a gentleman called Pete Dale. And so we went on this journey for the 3 months, and the church felt it was a really good idea that I did. And God spoke to me about the gateway of the city and to impact the community there. And just by its very nature, I ended up overseeing Rugby League a few years later, stepping away from that particular church to invest in a wider engagement in Rugby League, and then became chair of their foundation. And only recently stepped down from that last couple of years because I had health concerns. So yeah, and I'm all or nothing. I give everything. So I gave everything into that club, even though a lot of people have moved on and changed. I love that club. I love the people, and I love that community in that sense. And so it was an immense privilege to get involved. And that's how I got involved for 5 years, 6 years, chaplain at the Bradford Bulls and overseeing chaplains within Rugby League. And then that took us up to 2015. And that's when I was asked to take on the leadership of sports chaplaincy, which was an immense privilege.
Just cycling back a tiny bit to your time with Bradford Bulls. Firstly, you're able to share a little bit about what your role entailed there. And also, are there any sort of moments from your time there that you look back with particular pride?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think because so many people now, chaplaincy is chaplaincy on one level. It's about just connecting with people. We have 5 core values: presence, excellence, relationship, confidentiality, humility. And you can't be a chaplain if you're not present. And I think more you're present, more opportunities arise. So I was able at that time when the club went into financial challenges, I was able to invest more time into that club, invest into the coaching staff, invest into the players. And in that sense, because I invested, people saw me as a point of reference to be a listening ear. But ultimately, a chaplain is there, we would say, pastorally proactive, looking to help people, spiritually reactive, spiritually responding to those questions. I'm not trying to force my faith, but hopefully if I'm light in the darkness, someone will see something on me and say, why do you do what you do? But ultimately, you become friends with people. It's a friendship, relationship, embedded kind of role for me. And so I became just really great friends with people in the club, the players, the coaches, the wider fan base, whoever was owning the club at the time, because that moved on quite a few times. I was able to be a steady port of call, even in those challenges. I was able to build relationships and invest. And some of that, there are some stories I can share, but quite seminal in that sense, in the sense of where people would say that really impacted me. Just to a moment where I maybe have prayed for somebody, or a moment of just being there for someone and someone recognizing that. I remember what she doesn't work, I haven't been there for many, many years, a really lovely lady who worked in the club shop, and she had some challenges, just normal challenges, but she was a vivacious character, lovely person, lovely husband, really great family, but they were going through some challenges, and they just asked me to support them through those challenges, which is an immense privilege when a stranger in that sense asks you to support them. And in that, I remember saying something that really impacted me. She went, "I wouldn't be still married if it wasn't for you investing in me and my husband." And she said, "And you always change the atmosphere. You're always smiling, you change the atmosphere." But she says, "I know you're going through your own challenges, but you still change the atmosphere." And I was going through a fairly dark moment in my life, not because of anything in particular, just some of the challenges I personally was going through. Probably exhausted, probably a little bit of serotonin levels were down, probably just invested so much and didn't see the rewards I felt we should have seen from a church perspective. And I remember once going onto the pitch, and the announcer would always do the moments remembrance or silence. So let's say it's on Sky TV. This is a long time ago now. And the stadium might have had 10, 15,000 people. Let's say 10. Let's not be evangelistic. Let's be sure. Let's say it was 10. And 2 minutes before it goes live, he throws me the mic and says, "I hate doing this. You're the pastor. You do it." I'm like, "Great. You've had a week to process this. You now give me nanoseconds to process." One, I wasn't used to going on a pitch with 10,000 people. I was used to being on the edge and saying hello to people. It's an eerie sense going on to a pitch in front of a load of people and then doing a moment's silence. And then I actually prayed. And when I came off, the stadium announcer, he was a great friend of mine, said, "Wow," he said, "you don't realise what's just taken place." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's never been silent when we've done a silence. There's always people chatting and messing." And he said, "But you did a silence and the whole stadium was silent." And I processed that. And I know that wasn't me. That was just the presence of God. And so sometimes and that's why I use that scripture about Samson. So often we don't realize, conversely, like the Spirit of God left him and he didn't know. So often we're carriers of God's presence and we don't know. And so as a chaplain, it's that intentionality about taking God's presence, being aware, looking where God's already at work. It's like saying I'm a Christian and I go to a football match. It doesn't really change you. But if you're a chaplain, all of a sudden you're more alert, you're looking to help, you're looking to speak, you're looking to see where God's at. It's an attitude, it's an intentionality. So for me, yeah, presence as a chaplain, you've got to be present. But it takes time to invest in people. People have got to learn to trust you. You don't know what baggage they're coming to the table. So some of this is an immense privilege when someone does trust and does a verbal vomit on you. You don't use it as tittle-tattle. That's why I'm not great at sharing stories in that sense, because when someone's shared something confidential, and even when they've given me permission, I don't like sharing it. That's what they shared with me. I'm not a great storyteller. I'm a real person. I've been in rooms when someone's told a story and I've got to the end of it and thought, "Man, I wish I'd been there," and then realised I had been there and it hadn't been nothing like that. They were just a great storyteller. I'm the opposite way around. I lower everything. I turn it because some of that's really personal and some of that's really intimate, and some of that, for me, I hold precious, and therefore you don't treat it like it's just a story or something to be played out on social media. So sometimes it probably doesn't do me well because people want stories and people need tittle-tattle and people want... But ultimately, just aware that people have the confidence to share with you, and you've, in some small way, been able to speak some hope and life into someone's been an immense privilege.
If we could talk a little bit now about the history of Sports Chaplaincy UK, and also can you speak to the work of Reverend John Boyers? And from what I can tell, he did a lot of pioneering work with initially Watford in the 70s and moving on to United, and his role in the beginnings of it as well.
Yes, the Sports Chaplaincy in its original name was SCORE, and I could never remember what SCORE stood for, but now I can. Supporting chaplains, offering resource and encouragement. So John, yes, was the founder of that in 91. Obviously, chaplaincy on one form or level had been taking place across sports clubs since they started, because a number of them started out of churches in that sense. But John started at Watford, as you said. He answered a call from Graham Taylor. I think Graham Taylor had put something out in the press. If you're a volunteer and you want to help, and that convicted John. John just at the church around the corner, invested in Watford for, I think it was probably a decade, and then was approached to go to Manchester and was at Manchester for 20, might have been 26, 27 years, but certainly over 25 years investing in there. And then obviously looking not just to develop his role, but develop chaplaincy across predominantly football originally. And then it grew. So when I met John in 2009, John was great and has been, and I'll see John at least once or twice a year just to go to his house. He always feeds me, him and his wife, and great friends, honour them for all the hours and time and years that he had invested. That, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I would always honour John for the work he did at Manchester United, but also he did loads of work on sports chaplaincy, on events at the Olympics, Commonwealth Games, a lot of stuff you will never see in some of the original training that we did. So yeah, John was phenomenal. Was still part of the organisation probably till 2017. So he was still active at Manchester United. And so we would and still do catch up with him. And he's still an avid supporter of sports chaplaincy, always giving me words of encouragement. Yeah, he's a great guy. And his son is actually a chaplain in Scotland where he's pastoring. Yeah, John's got that legacy. He was a character. When you're pioneering and founding a ministry, you're dealing with different challenges, different oppositions. But John did a phenomenal job and left the organisation in a really healthy and positive way. So we've been able to take it forward. It's always had its challenges financially because church love to sow into things when they can get tittle-tattle, but they don't want to sow into things when they don't get tittle-tattle. But I think for us, we've really seen God move. And we look at the World Cup. That didn't just happen. I'm not saying it was just us. There's loads of remit, but you don't invest in a field for 30, 40 years and then a harvest happens and it doesn't happen because you didn't prepare the ground or you didn't sow seed. And I'm not saying that was just down to sports chaplains. There's other organisations that are involved, but also I think there is that element, a spiritual element, that we will plant seeds that will grow into oak trees that someone else will sit under its shade. You know, scripture, sometimes you will plant and someone else will harvest, and you will harvest where someone else has planted. So I'm a big believer in that, but I think we've got to hold on to what God's given us with integrity. And so, yeah, John did a phenomenal job for 30 plus years.
And so when you arrived at Sports Chaplaincy in 2015, can you share a little bit of where the organisation was at and also, therefore, what your ambitions were for the role and how you're getting on, I guess?
Well, indirectly. So between me and John, there was a gentleman you will have heard of because he's now the founder of the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer, which is Richard Gamble. And me and Richard got on really well. And he asked me to oversee Rugby League. And then he'd only ever determined to do 3 years. We were potentially merging with another Christian sports ministry. For whatever reason, that didn't happen. So it was more by default that everyone stepped back and there was only me standing in that sense. And so in 2015, it was just survival was the key thing. And obviously just to reflect and review some of our systems. But I really felt God give us over those next couple of years a sense of the opportunity. I think going through a potential merger and realizing actually we're not the smaller kid here. We may not be financially the bigger partner, but actually from a social footprint, for the number of people we engage, the number of pastors that are now actually engage. And this is back in 2015, let's say I think we said 320, but I don't think anyone had deducted numbers off. So when I did a clean wipe of the system, I think I took 300 chaplains off it in about 2017. So let's say there was 250 chaplains, active chaplains back then. It was an immense privilege. You know, some of these have been doing it years, some were quite new. Some of it we were trying to build our training, which we'd done in relationship with John and Richard, so I'm not going to take any credit that they gave. But I think for me, it was where God's taken us for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so, yeah, I wouldn't have thought where we'd be. We'd be here now. I'd always like to be further down the line. We're around about 1,000 chaplains. We're over 1,000 chaplaincy roles because some chaplains do more than one role. But we're approaching, let's say, 1,000 chaplains, and we certainly will hit 1,000 chaplains this year. The challenge is people join and people leave, and there's that kind of churn because of the nature of the organisation. But I'd love to see us I believe we should be about at least 4,000 or 5,000 in the next 5 years and 10,000 next 10. And the reason I say that is because every sports club that used to just have a men's club now has a female club, has a disability club, has an academy, has an all-ability. So I just think even if you get into no more clubs, we should be placing more than one chaplain in. And also the expectations of professional sport now is A chaplain cannot do what they expect in a day or half a day a week. It's impossible. So I think part of that is we need to create better teams, work on, and it's always easier lower tier because lower tier means they're expecting volunteers anyway. But I think the way we do that, we have credibility. We have some tremendous team players in our leadership team. And I just think from a God perspective, we have so many opportunities to be the hands and feet of Jesus in those wider community. And that will have a ripple effect. So we have the vision for National Sports Sunday and with Global Sports Sunday, which I really believe that helps take the church and see a paradigm shift take place.
I feel that football as a form of ministry is so vital. And I was wondering what work you did in that regard, and probably mostly about the National Sports Sunday. But I was just wondering, do you see it as a really useful tool of ministry and perhaps an untapped tool of ministry as well?
Yeah, I certainly, when I was down south, I think the natural thing, I did a five-a-side, and we had about 40, 50 guys turn up to a five-a-side. I think it's a natural thing when you take ownership. Sport is a great opportunity to connect with both, also challenge Christians. This isn't just five-a-side, this is a witness. So yes, we play to win, but we play fair. We don't swear, we don't do this, and we set the tone. So I do believe, not just as a chaplain, but I also believe sport allows you to express some of those values in a healthy, positive way. Because we look at sport and people look at Christians sometimes and they never say that to me. I'm 6'4" and 18 stone. So I don't get the look down, you tiny little weak man, because I've never been any of that. I've done boxing and I did some bouncing when I was younger. So I don't get that. But the reality of it is, it's okay to express a healthy aggression in that sense. We have emasculated Christian men. I'm not saying everyone's an alpha male in that sense, but we've emasculated men. There is a righteous anger. I believe we are called to stand in the gap. I believe we need strong men to stand up in tough times. We need strong men to stand against injustice and stand up for justice. So for me, I think there's so many opportunities that sport makes available. It's a common language that a lot of people speak. So in that sense, and certainly for me, when we take it into other sports ministries like Ambassadors and Christians in Sport and Kicking, there's some great ministries out there that we partner with. I'm not bothered who gets the logo out there. I'm more bothered about getting people to come to know Jesus in that sense. But each of us have to do it in the way God's asked us to do it. But for me, National Sports Sunday is about challenging the church's mindset that before COVID, it was everyone come to us in our four walls. And the truth is, the church is not the four walls. The church are the people. And the Great Commission says, go, not come. But actually, the church, through COVID, had to learn to disseminate the information more effectively and not expect people to come. And I'm seeing that right now. We used to think, well, they play sport on a Sunday. Well, they're not going to change. So what's your strategy as a church? How are you going to engage that largest untapped mission field on your doorstep? You've got 5 kids in your Sunday school. They've got 500 kids. What are you going to do different? How are you going to strategize them? And the answer isn't the same, because Christian parents want the answer to be the same. It's not the same. For one kid, there's an act of sacrifice. You don't play sport on a Sunday. For another kid, they can play sport on a Sunday. But as parents, it's our role to navigate that with our children, but also navigate if they don't go to church on a Sunday, or can the church do a 4:00 service, or does the church already do something on Thursday or Friday night, or can we go to a different church in that sense that meets our spiritual needs or helps meet our spiritual needs? So for me, it's about the church being strategic. It's about the church looking and saying, what is God's Great Commission? And how do we meet that Great Commission, rather than expecting same old, same old? So I don't think there's one answer for all, but it's for each church to, when I did the Commonwealth Games, I was working with the Salvation Army. Rob Moy is a great guy, does their sports. He was getting churches involved in the Salvation Army just to engage around the Commonwealth Games. And I remember him telling me about one church that was just being half a dozen or a dozen old ladies, for a better phrase. And how do we get involved? Now, there are things like carpet balls but he just said, what are you good at? We love praying. Well, let's start praying for the other church that has loads of young people. And so for me, it's not about we can all do everything. It's about finding God's inherent gifting in you. So if you've got a church and we say, we ain't got any young people, well, stop praying for the odd person and start praying for a church that has it, and invest your prayer time. God will bring people into you, but you've got to be, if you've got an empty hall, how can you use that empty hall? Can you give it to a sports club to do with their events? So some of it's just being, strategic. Some of that's just thinking outside the box. Some of that is saying, hey, we have some great resources. We're not using them effectively. How can we share those resources? And so often, the biggest challenge is getting people over the doorstep. If you can get them to come in for other reasons at times, for them to come in then into church, God spoke through an ass in the Old Testament, and sometimes he still does. So the truth is, God will speak to people. We've just got to be willing vessels. And so for me, sport is a great vehicle, a great tool, and we've just got to be really think how God is speaking in each community differently, and appropriate our resources and appropriate our strategy accordingly.
And speaking of those resources, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing what you offer to your chaplains and what you offer to the wider community. And I guess in turn, what you expect from your chaplains and the values you want them to uphold.
So yeah, for us as an organisation, you're never my chaplain in that sense. You are part of us, part of the network, but you're not my chaplain. Ultimately, you're always an expression of your local church to your local community. So I'd love to commission chaplains in their church to serve in their local communities, so the church is praying for them. But for me, our responsibility is to train, support and equip. So we do an induction. So we'll go through a process. One, to find out, to make sure someone has those pastoral giftings. I'm not there to give someone pastoral giftings. They've either got them in the church or they haven't. If you said to me, Warren, I think I'd love to be a chaplain in my local whatever club, I'd say, great, let's have a conversation. Make sure your heart's right. Make sure your motivation's right. And then we'd say, okay, now we know your heart's right. Let's do an expression. So we'd get a little bit of history on you, where you stood theologically. Your pastor was happy. You get a personal reference to tick all those safeguarding boxes and other things. If your pastor came back and went, oh, they're great, but I won't have them do anything in church, I'd be saying, well, I won't be having them do anything in the real world. But if you're happy for them to serve in a ministry in your church, then we're happy to support them, serving your local sports community. So we will do initially an induction, which is at this moment 3 2-hour sessions on Zoom. Might look different in each of our home nations and Ireland. We're looking to put this on an online training platform, but that's the initial thing, to set someone up for success. Not to say you've got to do 5 years training, but to ensure that they've done their training, to make sure they don't drop the ball in the first few weeks. That's where most of the challenges happen. That's where if they drop the ball in that first week, to try and gain back that reputation. Trust is not easily gained, but it's easily lost. So part of that is sharing heart, sharing vision, sharing what the do's and don'ts are. I've already shared that our values as chaplains express the presence, excellence, relationship, confidentiality, humility. You've got to be present. You can't just turn up for a free meal. We're not the finished article. Athletes are always trying to improve themselves. We should be, as Christians, looking to upskill ourselves. We serve a God of excellence. We're not excellent, but we're striving to be excellent in that sense. And then relationship, both vertically and horizontally. We need to build relationship with people, but we've got to make sure our relationship with God is key. Confidentiality, especially in sport. People share stuff. It's not for us to share tittle-tattle. It's not for us. It's to hold that in taking safeguarding and concern. It's holding people's information in a confidential and safe manner so that people can trust us. And then ultimately, we've got to do it in a manner of humility. I always say it's humility or being humiliated. It always reveals our heart as much as it reveals other people's hearts. And so if God's asked you to be there, God knows the challenges. I say this, I've heard leaders, my times, I've got to be fruitful in my time. And I don't feel I'm being fruitful. So, well, did God tell you to go? If God told you, God knew the challenges, and you knew we expect you to stay at least to invest 5 to 10 hours a week, because you think you're going to walk in a club and see 50 people for 5 minutes and build up relationship. It takes time. It takes a long, long time. So yeah, loads of great stuff.
You speak quite a lot about mental health online, and you've sort of quite rightly stated it's only in sort of recent years where it's become a bit more socially acceptable to share your issues on this. And I guess especially in, quite hyper masculine environments that sports teams can be. And a lot of high level athletes, especially in football, I really feel get quite a raw deal. It's like your bed of money will protect you from your nan being ill. It will protect you from your marriage potentially breaking down. There seems to be very little. It's like, oh, well, you can go cry into your piles of money, etc. And do you see sports chaplaincy as a good way to alleviate these problems in athletes?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's really difficult to describe sometimes what a chaplain does. There are, ritual things that a chaplain may do, but a lot of it's unseen. So actually to be a listening ear, and people now understand, I actually feel sports navigated mental health probably better than society at first, because it was in a hyper masculine environment, but they recognize there are challenges. And certainly if you're an elite athlete, you already have certain challenges, because to be elite, you're on the spectrum or you won't be elite. So that comes with its own challenges. To be elite, you've got to be selfish. So all of a sudden, and now with being elite or professional, you have the eyes of the world on you. Everyone's got an opinion. And so it does get into people's psyche. And so for us, being there, being a safe port of call is super, super important. But I also think for chaplains and some are obviously church leaders, it's a great way for them to take their skill sets outside of the four walls of the church. And this is part of their mission as well. So they're not just talking at their congregations, this is what you should do, this is what I'm doing. You've got to sometimes make yourself bare in that sense, make yourself vulnerable. And I think the only time you can invest into someone else is if you're willing to be vulnerable with that individual. I think certainly from my life experiences, I couldn't really help people until I was broken myself. And I remember a pastor once saying, until you're broken, God can't really use you. And I hated it, but he was right on one level, because there's an element of pride, there's an element of I'm more than a conqueror, I'm able to do everything, I'm not. And ultimately at times life it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Life hits you. And you've got to be able to navigate that. And also, we can over spiritualize or over chemicalize some of these challenges. And actually, mental health, it's physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, it is chemical. And it's not just one. It could be a mixture of all those. And the doctor throwing tablets at you weren't going to sort out a spiritual challenge, but it's also not going to sort out, So there's loads of little things that we can help. But athletes are doing a lot of those things. They're eating well, they're exercising well, they have good psychology. If they're a Christian player, so it's slightly unique in that sporting environment because they're doing a lot of the things a normal person would do to overcome moderate depression, for a better phrase. So I think one of the key things is that a chaplain has an independent perspective. We'll always signpost wherever the professional governing body will ask us. And so that's true. So for me, when it comes to a chaplain, it is so important just to be available and to listen and then to signpost effectively. So when we don't have all the answers, you might not be a qualified counsellor, you might not be a sports psychiatrist or psychologist, but we can signpost to one. We can signpost to someone. And money does not make your problems go away. And at times it complicates it, becomes multifaceted. Why someone wanted to be my friend? Is it because they want a photograph with me? Because they want me money? Because I'm famous? Is it? There's loads of, and yet the other athletes, their identity is fixed in what they do, because they might not be an elite football player, but they might be the star striker on the pub team, and their identity is I'm the striker on the pub team. So yeah, really, really interesting and important.
And just to sort of tie that up a little bit, I believe I saw you say once somewhere, we want to see an expression of God's love and compassion in every community sport. And I was just wondering, what areas would you like to see growth in for sports chaplaincy?
For me, I think there's always opportunities in different areas. So areas such as, I think, gyms, park runs, which are massive, and just the upspill of CrossFit and MMA and boxing. So all those core, in that sense, community places where people gather rather than just teams and individuals, but where people gather. So the stats are a good gym has all the equipment, a great gym has community. And so for me, look at golf clubs, 5 million members. How do you engage with a club that might have 500 or 600 members? It's really difficult because they play at different times of the day. So part of that is coming up with a strategy of how you do that effectively. And that's why you've got to be able to do it in team. But I do believe for me, the dream is to see an expression of his love and compassion in 160,000 sports clubs. So for me, that would be the dream.
And putting another quote here, you can tell what I was up to yesterday. You spoke of really enjoying when someone says, I can't, but with some help, that becomes I can. So how does that apply to sports chaplaincy? I'm wondering what that looks like in a practical and spiritual sense to you.
Yeah, interesting. I think so many people in life say I can't, whatever that I can't be. I can't be a good person. I can't be a Christian. I can't be the best in the team. And there are some practical things, but a lot of this is a psychology. A lot of this is, I remember hearing a quote of a doctor working in an asylum, and the doctor turned around and said 80% of the people in here could walk away if they could forgive others and forgive themselves. And so that's I can't attitude. We've all failed. But I think it's like a child. A child just naturally falls over and gets back up. But in life, we've taught I can't. And so for me, it's you can. I can. Or ask yourself a better question rather than saying I can't, which is a full stop. Maybe I can. Or possibly I could try harder. Or maybe it will look different. And so sometimes it's finding different ways of expressing, but not putting I can't or putting blockers on. And it's like they will never come to church, so I'll never ask them. I can't ask that person to come to church because they don't like me. Well, you've already stopped yourself. But I think if you say, stop answering people's questions for them, I think we've got to learn to ask better questions. I've got a list and I've got to review that list of why am I asking that question? Or I'm not asking a question, how was your weekend? What a poor question that was. How are you doing? How's the family? All the generic questions, but actually, how do we dig deeper? How are you feeling today? Fine. No. How are you feeling? It's a classic asking the question, why, to try and drill down to those details. So I think for me, when we review all that, it's trying to take people on their journey in a positive way. So a lot of sport athletes will not think about retirement, but they're retiring when they're in their 30s. That's not retirement. That's a kid just about to start life. So it's about saying you've got transferable skills. It's about saying you've been blessed with in so many areas, but now you're going to have to work in a different area. And actually, you weren't natural at that. You were doing it from 5 to 35. That's 30 years. Now you've got another 30 years. What are you going to invest that time into? How are you going to invest in yourself? How are you going to invest in your family? How are you going to invest in your community? What are the actions that you need to do? So, just give you a simple example. I would have, when I was chaplain, I would have a great guy. He'd ring me up and it'd be, Wazza, how are you doing? Fine. And as soon as he said pastor, I knew he had girlfriend trouble. So I'd say, Pastor, can we have, and it'd always, can we grab lunch or can we grab a breakfast? So we'd grab a breakfast and he'd say, I want what you've got. And he'd talk about some of his challenges. So, well, I can't tell you what to do, but this is what I do. So if you want this, this is what I do to get that. You know, the first sign of madness is doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. And so ultimately, at times, people want different results, but they're not willing to do something different. And if you want a different result, you've got to encourage people to make those small steps. I love the statement from, I might quote it my way, but small steps done consistently creates massive change. We're so bothered about the big steps. And I like big steps because I want to do lots of big steps. But I also think at times in life, that's not always possible. But you can make a one step difference. So I always say to someone if they're feeling struggling, and even when someone makes this comment, can you give me another 10%? Can you give me another 20%? No, I can't. But I've never known someone turn around and say, can you give me another 1%? Even the person on their backside can give 1%. So why am I saying, I'm not asking for the impossible. I'm asking, just give me 1 more percent. Just give me 1 more percent. Can you give me 1 more percent? I've never known someone turn around and say, no, everyone's got 1 more percent in them. But if we all give 1 more percent each day, we haven't improved 100% in a year. We've improved 300% in a year. So sometimes it's about telling the enemy, you're not in control here. We go from one degree of glory to another, but we only do that if we're willing to put some of that energy and effort in. And yes, there's God's grace, and yes, nature and nurture, but a lot of it's through healthy choices.
And just to end on, you sort of once said you believed God was stirring something fresh, but moving in this generation of sports people. And with that in mind, how encouraged do you feel going forward in the future? And because I really feel like the World Cup was almost, I know there's been different expressions of faith increasing over the last few years, but the watershed moment to me was this year's World Cup. And my favourite part of that World Cup was watching the England and the French coming together in prayer at the end of the game.
Yeah,
I
totally
thought
agree.
that was just a beautiful image. And yeah, so I was wondering how encouraged you are by the increasing displays of faith.
I'm always slightly skeptical, if I'm being brutally honest, because, just because someone has a T-shirt, and some of this is cultural, but I do hope it's an expression of a real faith in their lives. Knowing some of those players, it is a true expression of their faith in their lives. I think when people give you permission, people step out. I think COVID forced us to think of faith and spirituality and God differently. Because where people would say years ago, I go to church, so therefore I'm a Christian. What, you go to church 4 times a year, baptism, funeral, wedding, don't make you a Christian. But their get out clause was, I go to church, therefore don't talk to me about Christianity. But the benefit of what COVID's challenged us is that we are spiritual creatures. And they now have big life questions, because some of that, I'm trying to put it in a polite way, some of those extreme dialogue that's taken place if you do that, that'll happen. In a normal person, it's like, that just doesn't make sense. It sounds right, but it doesn't make sense. And we've tried to block, or society's tried to block you from even asking certain questions because it's vilified you. Well, how do I help someone? Oh, if you have to ask that question, you must be a racist, you must be prejudiced, you must be this, you must be homo. It's like, no, if you don't ask and you can't learn, how are you supposed to? And I think so often people are in this, I'm a spiritual creature, but I don't know what that means. And I think in sport, yes, there's been an influx of players from different nations that's helped, where they've been allowed to express their faith. So I think it's an immense privilege. I think God is moving. Because I think sport is emotion and motion. We box everything off, spirit, physical. It's all one big thing, concentric in that sense. So God created us to be emotional creatures. God created us as physical beings. God created us as spiritual beings. We're all interconnected in that sense. And I don't mean that in a weird way. I just mean, Christ was born of a virgin, lived a life, died on a cross, rose again, ascended to heaven. He lived a physical and emotional life in that sense, but it was all spiritual as well. Fully God, fully human. And I think for me, just reflecting on all that, as I reflect on this, I think there's a healthy sense of, not overt, but there'll be a healthy sense of, guys, you're Christians, you have a responsibility. And I don't want to, because I've seen this in the past, certainly in the States, where they felt prostituted for their faith, and I won't want anyone to feel that. And obviously people go through a journey. Sometimes they're strong in the faith, life hits them, and then they're back. So it's being aware of that, but I think sensitively people need to be encouraged to press into God, not press into social media. People need to be encouraged to ensure that they have a strong walk with God while they're playing sport and after their sport. I think there is a responsibility that comes with that. I won't want some of those responsibilities because it's incredibly challenging and tough, and it's easy to point the finger. And if people were pointing the finger at me in my early 20s, I would have been vilified and the worst thing and womanized, all that stuff. So it's about not judging people. I would say to people who are listening, can you pray not for people to win competitions, but can you pray for people, Christian athletes? If it's, there's a load at Arsenal. There's not even a chaplain, it's their past. Load at Asaka in the team. There's a load at Crystal Palace. Actually, I think in 75% of clubs there is a Christian or a gathering of Christians, Bible studies and prayer meetings, of which we've been privileged as chaplains to support and encourage. But I would just say to the church, can you pray for them? Don't pray and don't ask for signatures and don't ask for things, but can you pray for them? Can you pray for their families? Can you pray for their children? Can you pray for their wife? Can you pray that they would be led in the right path, where they would have great support mechanisms, they would have great families, that they would have great administrators or agents around them, that they would be able to make healthy decisions and therefore create a healthy atmosphere and a healthy environment for other Christians to flourish and prosper in that sense.
Right, Warren, you've survived about an hour with me, which is no mean feat, let me tell you. Your reward is the any other business section. So if there's anything else I have missed or something else you would like to share, please feel free to do so.
Any other business? It sounds like a board meeting, that. Any other business?
I know, I don't know why.
And then you walk out of it and you go, I should have said that. I think for me, I can only do what I do because of my family. So yes, I had great heritage, but I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for the support of my wonderful wife, for the support of my children. So my children, 2 of them are grown up now, 2 of our boys are grown up. They came to the rugby league with me all the time. My youngest is always coming to either rugby or football and loves it, but and asks me sometimes for stuff that I can't get him because I've said no. But I would always honour the family and the wider family. One of my brothers is a sports chaplain. I would also honour the local church in the sense of they release you and pray for you and encourage you. But for me, I guess any other business is really a challenge and encourage the local churches to take part in Global Sports Sunday, which is simply a prayer movement across the globe to pray for the wider community sport, and then National Sports Sundays to really drill down and maybe do a sports service or a barbecue or community or something, just wear your sports shirts and do a sports themed service, or invite a football player, or invite a local athletes club or whatever it might be, and really take and be the hands and feet of Jesus, recognizing it's a massive community who have great values and we have the privilege of serving that community. So I guess any other business would be, hey, let's keep on pursuing God, encouraging each other, spurring each other on to be all that God's called us to be in the communities He's placed us in.
Thank you very much. Brilliant stuff. If you wish to find out more, you can head to sportschaplaincy.org.uk or find Sports Chaplaincy on your various social media channels. If you want to find me, you can find me at Faith and Footy on X or at Saturday Service Football on Instagram and Facebook. Head to livestreams.org.uk to find out more about my church. Mr. Warren Evans, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've loved hearing every little bit of your story.
That's really kind of you. Bless you, Graham. Take care.
Thank you.